friends. Welcome back to the practice of being human. I am always so glad that you're here. Last episode, we started a conversation about loving and loving well. We all, I think, could use a little bit of help in that department. And we started by just looking at the love we learned, and that was in the patterns that show up in our relationships, the protections, the roles, the emotional habits that we often absorb long before we have language for them, and then they stay with us. We carry them into our relationships as we move into adulthood. And we talked about what love seemed to require of us. So in the last episode, it was more about what we've learned and all the things that kind of come with that. And then today we're going to talk about what we can create with our love. But I think in talking about what love seemed to require of us, it helped us kind of think about what ways do we shapeshift, right? To stay connected to others. What does conflict touch in us? And when that occurs, how is that experienced in our bodies? And then how do we express ourselves and communicate that? What do we do with that? What are the triggers that reveal in us maybe some wounds that we are aware are more tender than we might have had any idea, but aren't really sure how to respond any other way other than to want to get away from someone or something because it triggers us, and instead to go towards triggers because so many of the triggers are information to say this is where we need to go because this is where the gold is, this is where the work is. And we do so with love and tenderness, right? And courage, of course. And then, of course, being aware of how we handle pain, how we respond to disappointment when we maybe disappear, right, into a relationship, or we just kind of check out and we lose ourselves. We fuse into another, we merge. And then what we learned about as little people, what boundaries look like and or not, and about guilt and uncertainty. So we touched on a lot of important things that I think all of us are better in understanding and knowing about ourselves so that we can choose more intentionally, thoughtfully. Today, I want to move into the love of loving well, but the love that we create. Okay, not what we learned, but what we get to choose to create more of. All right. So, loving well is not just about understanding our history. It is an important piece to it, but it's also about becoming more conscious in the present. And when we're more conscious, we can choose and then we can create, we can start anew, right? We can do some things that we've never known to do before. And we have a safe container to do that in. So it's about practice and what we practice. It's about what we repair, what we nourish, what we choose, and what we're building now. And this part matters so much to me. Okay. And I know that this matters to my clients because whether we are talking about a marriage, a parent child relationship, a friendship, or the inner relationship we have with ourselves, love needs so much love. TLC, tender love and care. It needs tending to, it needs watering, nourishment, it needs fertilizer. And it does not stay alive and thrive and grow by accident. A good marriage, it does not stay alive by accident, my friends. And we know this to be true. We see the evidence of that over and over and over. A connected family culture, it does not stay alive. That connective tissue isn't going to remain by accident. It requires work, it requires tending. And emotional safety, again, doesn't happen by accident. It's a creation. It's there because we've created the safe container for it to exist. So these things, all of these things that I just mentioned, require an ask for honesty. Honesty, repair, generosity, novelty, attention, humility, care. All of these things, when we have that, when we have those things as the ingredients to what it is to love, when the love inside a family is tended well, and that includes the marriage, the partnership, everyone, every human in that family system benefits. So today, I want to offer you 10 more conversations about the love we create from here. So again, some of these are for young adults to ask parents, and some are for parents to ask young adults, and then some are for partners, and then some are really simply just invitations for your own reflection. All right. So let's begin, my friends. Number 11, the conversation about what feels familiar. We do not always choose what is healthy first. We choose what we know. And sometimes, or a lot of times, what we know, what is familiar, isn't always healthy. We often choose what is familiar over what is healthy because that's what the brain does. That's how we are made by design. Familiar feels more safe than unfamiliar. Even if unfamiliar is growth and it's good and it's healthy and it's nourishment, it still is uncertain, it's unknown. And in that way, it requires more energy, more oxygen. And so the brain is always going to want to go back to the familiar because that's considered more safe. But knowing differently, we can understand that when the unavailable feels magnetic or the inconsistent can feel exciting in a relationship, right? Or the critical can feel normal. That is not ultimately what we want to choose because that's not healthy. But when it's familiar and we don't know otherwise, we're going to keep choosing it. But once we know differently, we can start to choose differently. And this is why I think a lot of people land in such similar spirals and get stuck and feel like they're just living in Groundhog Day over and over. And they end up in these same kinds of tussles with their partners or their kids or whatever may be. We keep kind of landing in the same pain. And why? So the question I think can start that conversation is, what dynamics feel familiar to my nervous system, to my body, even when they are not good for me? Because we can kind of know what that might be. So if it's criticism that's familiar in the way you talk to yourself, it's just the familiar, that doesn't make it good for you. And by the way, there is another way to treat yourself, to speak to yourself. And it's actually the most beautiful of ways. But again, we have to understand that that voice who's talking to us, that's super uber critical, that's not who we are. It's how we learned to speak to ourselves. We can learn, we can unlearn, and we can learn a new way. So keep that in heart and mind. A young adult might ask a parent, what kinds of patterns felt familiar to you, mom or dad, even when they weren't healthy? And I think all of us could probably name one or two of those from our earlier years. A parent might ask a young adult, what patterns do you hope you don't repeat? Right? And that could mean within the family system that they are. It could mean their patterns within a relationship that they are currently in. And it can mean really kind of anything. But what is it that you hope in terms of patterns not to repeat? Whether it's what you've seen, what you've witnessed, what you've done yourself, whatever that may look like. And then a partner might ask, what old pattern do you think we are most likely to recreate if we're not conscious? All right, number 12. This one is about receiving love, not giving love, but receiving it. I think we're all usually a little bit stronger and better in the giving and not as much in the receiving. And I always say it's really good to be good in both departments. So some of us are much better at giving love than receiving it. We know how to caretake, we know how to show up, we know how to perform love. But receiving love, kind of letting it in, trusting it, believing it, relaxing enough into it, that can be harder. So the question is it harder for me to give love or to receive it? Just notice that. No judgment, always no judgment, but just curiosity. And see where that curiosity takes you and why. Why would it be easier to give and not receive? Right? Is there more vulnerability in receiving? What would that look like? And why is that a vulnerability you're not willing to go for, right? Or lean into? A young adult might ask a parent, hey, is it easier for you to give love or receive it, mom, dad? And a parent might ask a young adult, how do you best receive love from me now? What is the most effective way that you feel seen, known, loved by me, held? What does that look like? How am I doing in that department? Do you feel attuned to? Do you feel seen? Do you feel heard? Do you feel held? Or, is there another way that we can go about doing this? Again, open the conversation, have these conversations. They're so helpful to just start to kind of connect on these levels. And you might hear something that can change the trajectory in a very beautiful, significant way. For a partner, you might ask, what helps you soften enough to let my love in? What helps you soften enough? What helps you lean in? What helps you acquiesce a little bit more to letting love in versus resisting it or fighting it or not even knowing that it's there to be received, right? What helps you soften into that? Number 13, conversation about truth. Truth, 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 my friends. Intimacy, real intimacy, requires truth. And every relationship worth its salt that is an intimate relationship requires honesty. Not performance, not image management, not people pleasing, and not strategic silence. Truth. And truth, it's your real feelings, it's your real needs, it's your real limits, it's your real desires. It's your real yeses, it's your real nos, and you reserve the right to change your mind at any time. But the quality of a relationship is deeply connected to the quality of the conversations inside that relationship. So the more brave you are, the more brave questions you ask, the more brave conversations you will have. And that will beautifully and kind of magically allow for this relationship to deepen and to grow in ways that you never imagined possible, just because you're asking a new question. So here's a question. What truth is hard for me to say out loud? What would that be? What truth is hard for me to speak, hard for me to put out into the world? What is that truth? A young adult might ask a parent, what truths were hard to speak in your family growing up? And I think all of us might be able to name one or two or three of those, right? And why were those truths hard to speak? What would happen if they were spoken? Or what was perceived to have happened if it were to be spoken, right? And what was the messaging? How did you know not to speak up? And that is even more good kind of fodder for the conversation. A parent might ask a young adult, what truth do you wish you could tell me more freely? Truth is so, it's like you need it in any relationship that's worth its salt, but that requires a holding. That also requires discomfort. It requires hard conversations. It doesn't mean there's a condoning of something, but there is a sense of holding and a presence and an availability for it. And then there is a process of deciding what to do with that and how to move with it and how to respond. But in order to have that kind of connection and to really cultivate intimacy in any relationship, we have to be honest. And in order to be honest, we have to feel free enough to be honest, right? We need that safe container to do so. So, how do we create that for each other and still have these very hard conversations at times? A partner, you might ask, what truth have you been holding that would bring us closer if it were spoken out loud, if it were spoken with care? What truth might come to light? What would you speak? What would you say? What are you withholding that maybe if there was something that could be spoken with care, could be shared, right? What would that look like? All right, 14, my friends, this one's repair, 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 repair. Conflict, it is inevitable. Rupture is inevitable, and misunderstanding is inevitable. And I think that's healthy. I think there's goodness in friction, in mirroring, in pushback, in saying I'm not okay with that thing, or that was hard, or that really hurt me, right? That's important. It's important in human relationships. My work is about being human and helping people be human. And in order to be human, we got to know how to relate, and we want to build a relational intelligence, a relational ability to move and to dance with our dance partners, right, so to speak, and to learn the choreography and to learn what works and what doesn't. But we are all shaping each other constantly, okay? So this conversation about repair and that conflict is inevitable and rupture is inevitable and misunderstanding is inevitable. This is true in human relationship. The question is not whether relationships break down. The question is whether the people in them know how to come back. We all want to learn how to do that. We all want to learn how to circle back to each other. Connection, touch, right? That intimacy, the honesty. Can you own your impact on another? Can you apologize without defensiveness? Can you listen without building your case? And can you return with tenderness, curiosity, compassion? So here's the question for you, my friends, on this one. What did repair look like in my home growing up? What did you see modeled for you? How did it play out? What was shown to you? And then how did you learn to repair in your relationships going forward? And a young adult might ask a parent, so what did repair look like in your family, dad or mom? And a parent might ask a young adult, what helps you trust that a rupture can actually be repaired? And that young adult might likely say, knowing that you're able to circle back and maybe dad or mom apologize for something where you know you misstepped or where, there were some hurt feelings and being able to take ownership of that, accountability. Like, how amazing is that? And then the likelihood of being able to trust and have honesty and intimacy is so much greater because of that. So when we rupture, what helps you come back to one another, right? Pay attention to that, my friends, and that's something you can ask your partner. And this leads right into number 15, which is accountability. Accountability is one of the most loving things we can offer another. It's not shame, it's not humiliation, it's not scorekeeping, but it's this. I see what I did. I see how it impacted you, how it affected you, and I'm willing to take responsibility. So the question is, what does a real apology mean to me? And that could just be like a real apology is when someone really takes full ownership and accountability for what they said or did and the impact it might have had. I still am responsible for tending to my insides and holding space for whatever it is that I took in and that hurt or that was heavy duty. But ultimately, between the two people, there's a softness, there's a tenderness, there's a connection, an intimacy and honesty. And that to me is what a real apology can look like as well. It's saying, I am truly sorry to have said something or done something that hurt so much. And a young adult might ask a parent, so, mom, dad, what kind of apology or acknowledgement mattered to you growing up? A parent might ask a young adult, when I miss you or hurt you, when I don't attune, when I don't see you fully, what kind of acknowledgement actually helps? And I love this because there's opportunity here for a young adult to say, you know what, if you just get off your phone, if you just look at me, if you be at the table with me, or when we're in conversation and you don't have distractions, you're all in on me. Like that helps me feel heard, feel seen, acknowledged. Yeah, that'd be a big one, mom or dad or vice versa, my friends. A partner might ask, you know what does accountability look like to you? Not just in words, but in action. The other day, this is kind of similar, but like I came out of our bedroom, it was early morning. Craig always gets up before me. And it was still dark outside. And he was sitting in the family room and he was sitting in a chair. He had his earbuds in and he was listening to something. And I came out and he kind of looked and then he was back at it with his phone. And I was like, oh no, like that felt cold. It almost felt like I didn't even exist. It was like I wasn't special. He saw me, but not really. And he was back at what he was doing. And I felt dismissed almost like you don't really matter. Now I know this is a story I was telling, and I know that I matter, and I know that Craig Brummel would never have done that intentionally, but I held that close. I actually went into the sunroom, kind of did my own meditation and took some time. But I was aware of how that triggered in me that sense of like, wow, why am I being so sensitive to this? What is this bringing up in me? Speaking of triggers, right? And then he came in because he was on his way out. He was a little bit late. He had a coffee meeting and he was in a rush and he gave me a kiss goodbye, but it was like kind of like, okay, gotta go, gotta go. I'll see you tonight. I love you. Bye. And again, I felt a little bit brushed off. So I thought about it and held space for it, did some journaling on it. And I know this might sound silly, but for me, I was conscious of all of this kind of happening and also holding it and not judging it and not trying to dismiss it or shut it down. Or for me, it's like normally I'll withdraw and I'll just be like, I'm good. I don't need anyone or anything. I got this, right? So what I chose to do instead, because he had also then left me a voicemail, I responded a little bit later where I was a little more calm and just in good space. And then that night I talked to him and I said, babe, I just want you to know that when I walk by you and you're on your phone and maybe I haven't seen you, right? And it's first thing in the morning, acknowledge, like just look up, engage, connect for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and maybe a kiss hello, right? But that would mean the world to me. And that means a lot, clearly. I didn't know how much it meant to me until I didn't have that. And what he's done every time since is he stops what he's doing and he looks up and he engages, and it might be for a few seconds or more. And then he's back at it and I'm back at it. But it's a game changer. And that wouldn't have happened had I not taken the time to communicate to him from a place that wasn't anger and accusing, but more of that hurt. And I don't quite know exactly why it hurt so much, but I'm holding that. And could we do that a little differently? And he has responded so incredibly kindly to that. So, anyway, I share that because, again, I think there is accountability in word and action that, especially in the action, that speaks so, so loudly. So, number 16, the conversation about the marriage or partnership at the center, at the heart of the home. And this one, my friends, I am so passionate about because I think it matters so much. And I have many dear friends who are in long-term marriages or in newer marriages, but in relationships where these relationships require tending. And one of the great invitations of adult life is remembering that that primary partnership in a family needs tending to, not just the children. This isn't a transactional relationship. It's not all about logistics. It's not co-parenting all the time, every day, all day. It's not just getting through the week. It's actually saying, you are my person, and I'm going to make some time and space for you. Nourishment, delight, honesty, repair, attention, play, aliveness. Every relationship worth its salt, and an intimate relationship most especially, requires that TLC and that love and tending. So when adult partnership is cared for, I offer you this. I think everyone in the family system feels it. They know it. And everyone lives inside the fruit of that care. And that to me is as much about accountability to say, this is important. This is as important to me and my person as it is to the people that it feeds and nourishes and is the underpinning in this family system. So the question becomes, what does it mean to actively tend the relationship at the center of the family? What does that look like? What would you do maybe a little differently? What haven't you been doing? What might you consider doing that you're not doing right now? And a young adult might ask a parent, what do you think helps keep a marriage or long-term partnership alive? I've had young adults ask me this question, and I'm like, you know what? You should ask your parents this question. What do you think helps keep a marriage or long-term partnership alive? And they'll say, some of them will say, yeah, my parents aren't so great in that department. They are both are so busy and they're so, consumed by all the things. They don't really make time for themselves. And then I can ask them, like, how does that impact you? What do you make that mean? Right? What is that like? And how would you maybe want it to be a little different? And what could be the question you could ask or even bring attention and awareness around without judging, without accusing? But just even holding that and having awareness around it, I think is so, so important. And a partner could ask, what does our relationship need more of right now? To feel nourished. And for us, it was play. It was fun. It was aliveness. It was novelty. We were really good at kind of going through the motions, and we've been pretty good, I think, overall tending to that. But we were less practiced, less attentive, and less intentional around the play and the fun and the aliveness and the novelty. So we're doing more of that, and it's breathes new life. It's good stuff. And I think every relationship, and I know in talking with dear friends as much as clients, that every relationship needs some love, needs some intimacy that is fed from a lot of different angles so that it feeds the very heart of that relationship and of that family system. And I think along with this segues beautifully into number 17, because the more we take accountability, responsibility for the heart of the relationship, the one that is kind of at the center, our children then are less responsible for filling in the holes, right? The gaps. And they're not necessarily aware of this, but they just do this naturally. We all do it. And so this is about the roles that kids take on, because Our kids are so intuitive, and we as little people we were intuitive. We were adaptive little beings. We picked up on the nuances, on the layers, on the spoken and the unspoken. And I think our children, just like we did in our own homes, we can feel the emotional weather in a home. And we can notice the spoken and unspoken and often adapt in very quiet ways to help the family function. So, what we will do in roles as kids, and often too, it kind of continues into young adulthood, is we do what we can do to soften the edges, right? We become easy or funny or successful, or maybe we become a little more invisible. Maybe we help more than is probably warranted, right? Or need, and I mean, it's just that's what we do because that seems to help overall the overall tenor of the home. And maybe we become peacemakers, right? But here's the thing, and we all know this to be true, that these roles aren't necessarily roles we want to take on if in fact there is a relationship that's already tending to itself in a way that we don't need to be filling in the holes. We can be attuned and we can be growing and learning and modeling and evolving our relational tools by how we're being related to and how we see others in terms of the family system. But it's kind of noticing without the judgment, but with this awareness of like, what is the role that I play in my family? And for us, I know for me, it's like, what role did I take on in my family? And do I still carry it? And how do I carry it? Because most of us carry these roles into future relationships. It's just kind of the known. It's what we do. It's how we are. It becomes like a part of our identity, but it's a coping mechanism. It's not our personality. It's just kind of how we've learned to show up. And we can unlearn these things, my friends. So a young adult might ask a parent, who do you need me to be in our family, even unconsciously, right? Wow. Can you imagine being asked that question? Who did you need me to be in our family? Mom, dad, even unconsciously. And I think I could answer. I could think about Ellie, our oldest, and she was uber organized and on top of things and very capable. And that was incredibly, enormously helpful, beneficial for me and our family. But was it fair to her to the degree she did? No, not at all. And in fact, I didn't know, I never spoke those words, but she picked it up like that. And Craig was traveling a lot. He was gone a lot. And we had four kids very close together in 5 years. It was a party. And Ellie picked up quickly, but that was to her detriment. It wasn't fair. And I didn't know. I was unconscious of that till I became conscious. Once I've become conscious of it, I've been very thoughtful and intentional around making sure she does not keep doing those same things because she still has the tendency to do it. And she's 25 years old. I'm like, Elle, I got this. Elle, I got you. You're good. Right. So it's really interesting how that works. So just think about that. Who did you need me to be in our family, even unconsciously? As the young adult, ask your parent this. They might have no idea, but just bring awareness to this. And a parent might ask a young adult, what role do you think you took in our family? And how did that affect you? Right? What role do you think you took on in our family? And how did that affect you? Okay. A partner might ask this, what family role still shows up in the way you do relationship now? Were you the peacemaker? And are you always the peacemaker? Were you the problem solver, the fixer? Were you the savior? You know, you made everything better all the time. Were you the performer? Were you the actor outer, right? Who knows? But notice that and with curiosity and a big dose of compassion and have some fun with this. All right, 18, the conversation about the body. The body, the blessed body. The body knows, my friends. It knows when we are bracing. It knows when we're betraying ourselves. It knows when you feel safe. It knows when your yes is not really a yes. The body knows these things. Now, do we listen to it? Are we attuned to it? Probably not. We're probably pretty disconnected from those things. We want to start paying attention. One of the great invitations of adulthood is learning how to listen to the body instead of disconnecting, overriding it, and not tending to it. So here's the question. What does my body know that my mind is still trying to negotiate around? What is the yes that I'm still trying to say yes to, that my body is saying, this is a no? Think about that. Notice that. What is that? Or otherwise, what am I saying no to? That's actually a yes. And why? Why am I resisting that? Why am I saying no? What am I afraid of, right? Either way. A young adult might ask a parent, how does your body tell you when something isn't right? Notice that. How does your body tell you when something isn't right? And a parent might ask a young adult, what signals do you notice in yourself when you feel safe? And then a partner might ask, what helps your body relax and trust in connection? All right, number 19. We're almost to the end. This one's about aliveness. Love is not only about loyalty, my friends. It is about aliveness. It is about continuing to know each other, surprise each other, meet each other again and again and again in new seasons, right? Stay curious, stay awake, stay engaged, and don't pretend like you know all things. You don't. We're always learning, we're always evolving, we're always growing. So keep asking, being curious, and learning and having new conversations, brave questions, right? Keep asking the questions. And you might be hearing some different answers than you might have expected. A relationship can be deeply connected and committed and still need freshness, novelty, imagination, and play. So the question is, what makes me feel most alive in love? And a young adult might ask a parent, what do you think helps keep love alive over time? And a parent might ask a young adult, what kind of partnership do you hope to build one day? And they might say, I one that's a lot like you and dad or you and mom. And you might say, what are those things? And then you might also call attention and say, these are things mom and I aren't as strong in, or these are things dad and I don't do as well or readily, or we're not as attuned to. And are these and just having that opening and considering and dreaming. What is it? What's the partnership you want to hope for and build one day? So cool to ask that question. And a partner might ask, hey, what helps you feel most alive, desired, seen, and met by me in this relationship? That's a good one, my friends. Ask it. And then finally, number 20, the conversation about the love you want to create now. And finally, maybe the biggest conversation of all is, what kind of love do I want to create from here going forward? Not just on repeat, not just the one I inherited, not just the performative love. What do I want to create? What is new? What is different? What brings in more of that play? What enhances and deepens the intimacy between us? Do we need more aliveness? Do we need more vitality? Do we need more novelty? What is it? What kind of love feels most honest now? What kind of love feels spacious and responsible, warm, awake, free, real? Take some time, ask these questions. And a young adult, you might ask a parent, what does loving well mean to you today, mom or dad? And a parent, you can ask your young adult, hey, love, what kind of love do you want to build differently than the generations before you? Such a beautiful and I think revealing question. What is it that you want to build differently than the generations before you? And a partner might ask, what are we trying to create together now in this season? How do we build more of that intimacy? How do we connect on a deeper level? How do we make time for each other? How do we keep bringing in the new and refreshing and renewing and continuing to rise and elevate and evolve? What does that look like in this season? So maybe that really is the invitation here, not to master love in a day, not to become the perfect parent or child or partner or friend, but to begin having the conversations that make love more honest, more conscious, more spacious, more human. So maybe one question is enough. Maybe it's one brave text. Maybe it's one honest conversation with a parent, a young adult, a partner, a friend, or yourself that might allow for freedom to take root And maybe, just maybe, part of loving well is remembering that love is not static. It is not a box that we check, my friends. It is not something that we master once and for all, and then it doesn't require any tending, any love, any watering, but instead it is something we practice, something we tend, we revisit, we nourish, and something we keep choosing. We keep choosing our person every day, over and over, with more truth, more courage, and more heart. That is the practice. That is how we human. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being here with me today. And if these episodes spoke to you, maybe share them with someone you love. And better yet, maybe pick one question from today and ask it this week. I'm so glad that we're here together. I'll be with y'all next week. So much love.